when I was a student of ecology, I had to do experiments with plants and animals on competition. And a woodland was described, a woodland ecosystem, as a collection of trees in competition. Now, it's quite interesting, this idea of competition. You know where it basically comes from? It comes from misinterpretation of Darwin's evolution theory. Darwin wrote his book, The Origin of Species, and he discussed the principle of natural selection. What he basically discussed is that when conditions change, those plants and animals that are best adapted to change will survive in the evolutionary process. That's the thing he described. But that was hijacked 30 years after he wrote the book by an ecologist, biologist, anthropologist, and an editor of The Economist, Herbert Spencer. And he was looking for a scientific basis for the free market theory. The idea that in the free market, through competition, the best will survive and the rest will be weeded out. And he thought to find that in Darwin's theory. And he phrased the famous phrase, survival of the fittest, never said by Darwin. Darwin could have said that, if we interpret it correctly, as the fittest is the one that's best adapted. But Spencer interpreted it as the most competitive. And there comes this whole idea of competition and competitiveness into our world as a means for individual and collective progress. And that even entered biological interpretation of Darwin's evolution theory. I had to do experiments with plants and animals to see which one was the most competitive. Gents, our worldview is changing, and science is also changing. Modern evolution biology interprets and sees Darwin's theory in a completely different light. What we now know and understand is that the fittest, those species that will survive changing circumstances, are the most connected species. The species that are most in interbeing. Those species that build the most relationships. Those species that cooperate. The more cooperative you are in nature, the better you will survive stress, difficult circumstances, and change. So nature shows us that for well-being, we need to be connected. Have you heard of the Wood Wide Web?
The Wood Wide Web.
The Wood Wide Web, new concept in science. I learned that the forest is a collection of competitive species. No, gentlemen, underground, all these trees are connected through fungal threads, enormous webs of fungi that connect to the trees and that communicate with the trees. In the sense, when there's something happening which would threaten the trees get that information from the fungi. The fungi help the trees in survival, etc., etc. And suddenly, we now see that the woodland is basically a big organism of loads of individual species interacting, cooperating in such a sense that the whole system can resist all kinds of external threats. So cooperation, interbeing, being together is the way ahead. And I find it fantastic that I now live in a day and age that we in science, but also more and more in our societal terms, start to see this.
That's such a wonderful concept, that idea of, like, it fundamentally changes the paradigm on how we live as a society, because in capitalism, it's all about competition.
It's all about
and
doing.
when you talk about cooperation being the fundamental, the ultimate survive, like the strongest are the ones that cooperate best and are the most interdependent. That fundamentally changes one's perspective, because it's like, well, how can I help others? How can I be a connector? How can I be a bridge that aids and expands and unites and unifies rather than how can I get more stuff for myself? Because that's the current paradigm. How do I get more stuff for myself? And that means I'm going to have less stuff for you. Yeah, how can I give more? How can I be more useful? Like, it really changes things. And ultimately, it's probably the most selfish thing we can do as individuals, because a bit like that meditator who was sending loving kindness out, it lit up that kind of happiness part of our brain. When we give and we're interconnected and a deep sense of part of systems, we're going to feel better. Like, it will heal ourselves and we will not feel orphans.
Even you look at the Harvard longitudinal study where they kind of measured...
it's the Harvard Adult Development Study. Yeah, which was done over 84 years, and they had 3 generations of people, and they tracked them every year to find out what ultimately leads to a good life. And they had people that were millionaires and people that were billionaires and people that were poor and everything in between, mostly men, because it started in 1932. But they found that the single biggest thing for well-being is relationships, is the quality of your relationships dictates the quality of your life. And I guess that comes back to exactly what you were saying. Is interconnectedness is the ultimate thread of the most well adapted or the healthiest.
No, I think it is the formula for well-being on the individual level, but also on the collective level. And it is, of course, extremely sad that what we've done with this world and our world view, that we, on one hand, have brought in the idea of progress. And not progress in the sense of well-being. See, progress has been a sort of idea in our Western society for hundreds of years. Originally, it was progress in the sense of bringing, let's say, the divine world on this earth. Huh? The Christian idea of progress was that the world should become more and more the paradise that God had intended. Beautiful religious idea of progress. In the Enlightenment period, 17th, 18th century, the idea, because that of course is when religion lost part of its foothold, the idea of progress became progress in the sense of education. Educate the world. Bring the world with more reason and less superstition. That was the idea of progress, education. And in the 19th century, it was all brought down to one flat level, material progress. And we now, our whole ideology is we need to grow every year in materiality. That gives us happiness. And that's an enormous, narrow idea of what well-being constitutes. And this is so fed into our system. We have a government here in the Netherlands that makes one mistake after the other. And let me not get into it. But that is sort of re-elected every 4 years because it causes our gross national product to grow. And that idea that it makes us more prosperous, we re-elect it, and it can get away with all kinds of things. And the nation becomes more and more unhappy on a deep level, but we grow materialistically. We have narrowed the sense of human well-being to just material things. And there we become extremely lonely. We become spiritually impoverished. We exhaust this world. And ultimately we cause crisis after crisis. And our idea of progress needs to change. There is one nation in the world who has understood this perfectly. That's the Kingdom of Bhutan. There is just gross national happiness measured every year. That is material improvement, but also education, health, sense of well-being, and not only for humans, but for all inhabitants of Bhutan. Also the tiger, and also the trees, and also the water. That is true measurement of well-being.